I've always been a bit of a cynic about growing Christmas potatoes, and I think it's a bit of a gimmick by the seed companies really, just to sell more seed potatoes. Because if you just leave your potatoes in the compost, then you can just harvest them from the compost in December, and they're perfectly acceptable, and they taste pretty much as good as Christmas potatoes do. It's also extremely difficult to actually get potatoes to survive until sort of November, December time, because of the combination of frost and blight. And whenever I've tried it, I've always lost them, generally to blight in sort of September time, sometimes October. But I do think that there is some value in growing late potatoes, just because they break dormancy a little bit later than potatoes that you start in sort of March, April time. And so at this time of year, I do like to start a few potatoes, and they're the ones that we kind of eat during the April period, because it's quite hard to get new potatoes in good quality, good quantities and good quality of new potatoes in April. It's really relatively easy in May. So if you can kind of start some potatoes now and store them in the compost until April, then you get a nice harvest all the way through April, and then start with fresh new season potatoes in May. But I don't really like buying them, because it's quite risky, because, as I said, of the risk of frost and blight. So I was quite pleased when my daughter said to me, I've got this old tub of potatoes from last year that I forgot to harvest, and they're all starting to sort of break surface now. And I said, oh, just keep them for me. And so I brought them up in the car from Didcot yesterday, and I'll show you them. So in theory, in this tub, there's a whole load of potatoes that, have not really used up very much energy, because I haven't had very much water, and I haven't had very much in the way of fertiliser. And so I'm hoping that I can use these as my seed potatoes for my late crop. So I'm going to turn this out and see what I find. So there we go. That is absolutely exactly what I wanted to find. Loads and loads of potatoes, all in great condition, all ready. Well, obviously all sprouted, but still plenty of life left in them. And quite a few left in here, but they're all pretty small. So I am going to get those planted. So I've already prepared these tubs with homemade compost. Because it's homemade compost, of course, it's got plenty of weed seeds in. Marked my dibber to the right depth. And this is the only spot really that I've got on the allotment where I've got room for potatoes. Anyway, I've dibbed these little holes. I'm just going to drop their seeds into the holes. Pre-prepared these just with 1.5 handfuls of blood, fish and bone. So I just gently push the potato seeds down into these holes and then just cover them over. It's the easiest way in the world, basically, to get an extra crop of potatoes, hopefully. There'll be a 2-month supply there for us. And yeah, I just don't want to spend any money on Christmas potatoes or late crop potatoes. So if you want to know more about the way that I grow potatoes, take a look at the individual growing guides section of my ebook, which is linked in the description below. And just scroll down to potatoes, and there you'll find my guide to growing potatoes all year round. So if you do decide to try a late crop of potatoes, Christmas potatoes, then here's a few things to note. Keep them fairly well watered, because you really don't want scab on little new potatoes at Christmas or any other time. And scab grows a lot easier if you let your potatoes dry out. Once the potatoes are finished, keep them moist but not wet. I like to just keep mine stacked up in the mini greenhouse on my allotment plot, and so they keep really well because they don't break dormancy until much later than the ones that you started in April. So dormancy, at the end of dormancy, basically a potato starts to sprout again. So what you'll find is if you're keeping your potatoes in store or you're keeping your potatoes in the compost, by about March time, very early April, they'll all start to sprout and grow again. But this late crop won't start until well into April rather. And yeah, if you are reusing any potatoes, make sure they don't have any scab on them, that they've got clear, clean, unblemished skins, no signs of disease or anything like that. Whether this is strictly true or not, but I have found slightly more slug problems with potatoes that I grow in homemade compost compared to potatoes that I grow with kind of sterile compost that I buy. I do a lot in homemade compost, and so when I'm watering in nematodes for slugs on the allotment in general, I also give my potato pots of water, and I also give my oca pots of water, so two crops that seem to be particularly prone to a little bit of slug damage if you leave the tubers in the ground for a long period of time after they've finished growing. So I think that's pretty much it for the specific tips about growing a late crop. In terms of the varieties to use, I always use Charlotte. I think that's the best. In terms of the timing, some people try and do them quite late, so they'll do them in sort of August, middle of August, something like that, in the hope that they can keep the potatoes alive for a very, very long time, so that the potato tops are basically dying back, because they keep them in the greenhouse as well, basically at Christmas time. As I say, I don't really subscribe to that. I find they just keep perfectly well in the compost, even if you've sown them, or planted them rather, back in April. So yeah, I don't really worry about that. So I think the earlier the better, really, because doing them in June, July time, there's more of a chance that you're going to get a decent crop before frost or blight kills them.